Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. You may have heard the term psychological noise, and perhaps you have some idea of what that means. When it comes to psychological noise, it's important to realize that psychological noise is more than just distractions. It can also be described or defined as an attention environment that trains your brain to fragment. That means that over time, when you are exposed to psychological noise or when you are functioning in that kind of disruptive environment, your brain becomes less and less able to focus on any kind of continuous level because it is nearly constantly trained to keep switching its focus. In other words, to fragment your attention. What kind of things come to mind when we talk about psychological noise? The first thing for many of you may be things such as notifications. Many of us are bombarded by a wide variety of notifications throughout the day, both at work and outside of the working environment. Technology may be one of the biggest culprits, if not the biggest culprit, when it comes to distractions from notifications. Another form of psychological noise, or what contributes to it, is this expectation and perception that multitasking is a good thing. The reality of multitasking is that we are not truly doing multiple things all at once, but rather we are switching between tasks back and forth rather quickly, seemingly, seamlessly, but in reality, we are changing our focus. We are, in a way, fragmenting our attention. So, attempts at multitasking, or the perception that you are multitasking, simply adds to psychological noise. Think about how your day tends to go, whether you are at work or at home. Chances are there are situations, people, notifications, expectations, requirements that have the ability of getting your attention away from what you were just focusing on. And this is what creates that environment that can cause psychological noise, which in turn trains your brain to fragment. As to be expected, there are effects associated with psychological noise. Cognitive effects, for example. When you are exposed to psychological noise, you may find yourself unable to concentrate deeply or to process things deeply, but rather you may be functioning on a more shallow processing level. This is because constant disruptions to your attempts of focusing or concentrating prevent you from reaching that desired depth of focus, depth of processing. Psychological noise can also affect your memory, your ability to memorize or recall things easily. So memory strain is another cognitive effect related to psychological strain or psychological noise. And it's no surprise that psychological noise can lead to increased stress. Not only does psychological noise make it more difficult to stay focused, to concentrate, to process on a deeper, more productive or more meaningful level, it can also lead to an individual feeling the stress of everything that is associated with having to function in that kind of environment, an environment where psychological noise prevails. And although it may be easy to think of the effects of psychological noise on an individual, it's important to remember that psychological noise can also affect teams. Why would teams be subject to the effects of psychological noise? One big reason is culture of urgency. When teams work within an environment or perhaps create an environment of urgency, psychological noise and its effects seem nearly inevitable. Another reason for psychological noise as it relates to teams may be things such as unclear priorities. When teams try to accomplish things, but priorities or goals or expectations are not clear, that in itself can create quite a bit of psychological noise, things that prevent the team from accomplishing what they are supposed to accomplish. Another thing worth mentioning that may have quite an effect on teams in terms of psychological noise are expectations of being always available. That could mean being available after hours, during weekends, holidays, or vacations. But it could also affect teams where team members are located around the globe, where time zones and working hours differ amongst the different team members. It's all too common that teams where team members are located around the globe may experience some psychological noise due to these kinds of realities, the realities of people being located in different time zones and experiencing different working hours. One way of addressing psychological noise when it comes to teams is to, one, recognize the potential of psychological noise, especially when it comes to teams where time zones may differ for different team members, is to define team-wide focus blocks. That means setting defined times where team members can work uninterrupted and would not be expected to be available to everyone else. This, of course, has to be time blocks during working hours. Middle of the night does not count. A team or an organization may choose to prioritize asynchronous communication styles for a team over synchronous methods in team communication. Again, this allows individuals to focus on tasks and complete their work without potentially having to stay in sync with team members who may be in completely different time zones. Real-time interaction for teams that are spread around the world can be difficult and can lead to psychological noise. Something else to consider when it comes to teams is well-defined differences between what is urgent and what is routine, what is emergency and what is simply important. And finally, focusing on fewer tools and a one channel for truth. The more tools that a team has, the more likely things will be missed because not everybody is using every tool for everything. And sticking to one channel for truth, meaning keeping one place, one source where updates and information are available, can really simplify things amongst team members. When it comes to individuals dealing with psychological noise, it's important that people focus on one task at a time. Make it a point to define a single task window and turn off notifications. Let people know that you prefer not to be interrupted or distracted during this window of time, and focus on devoting your time and energy to a specific task, specific project, specific goal, whatever the case may be. Be mindful of what others may need from you within the organization, within your team. So focus on time periods of maybe an hour or 90 minutes rather than the entire day where you mark yourself as unavailable for interruptions. Be realistic, but start somewhere. Define windows of time when you will not be distracted or interrupted, but rather able to focus on one thing specifically. Define a specific time when you batch responses, whether that's emails, memos, or in-person conversations. Anyone's day can be completely fragmented when tending to responding to others throughout the day, but if you batch responding and work within a specific time, whether that's sometime in the morning, in the afternoon, or sometime in the morning and sometime in the afternoon, whatever makes most sense, whatever is required from you, try focusing on that rather than responding as inquiries come in. And finally, the last suggestion that I will make here for individuals, but also applies for teams, is make a point of closing loops. Don't leave things unfinished, whether that means completing a task, finishing a project, or at the very least, stopping at a point that makes sense, that's a good stopping point, rather than just a loose end that can only contribute to psychological noise, to psychological stress. A best practice that I would like to suggest to you is to try something for 2 weeks. Define 2 focus blocks within your day, maybe one in the morning, one in the afternoon, whatever works best for you. One could be a focus block that you devote to a specific task or goal, and the other one could be where you focus your time responding to others. Commit to keeping these 2 focus blocks every day for 2 weeks and see where your stress level is at the beginning of this exercise and after the 2 weeks. You may be surprised how helpful it can be to define blocks of time where you are able to focus on one thing without interruptions. Not only could that be tremendous for your productivity, it could also reduce your stress at work. So I suggest you give that a try. And if you find it working well for you for 2 weeks, why not continue? As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Constant interruptions that most face throughout the day can actually rewire your brain. An environment where interruptions are frequent and perhaps nearly constant can actually train your brain to fragment. This is something that is often related to things such as notifications and interruptions. But things like multitasking can also contribute to psychological noise. The effects of psychological noise can lead to stress, memory strain, and shallow processing. This can affect individuals as well as teams, and both have some options. Team-wide focus blocks can be as effective and as beneficial as individual focus blocks. Limiting the number of tools that the team uses, batching responses, and closing loops can be beneficial for both teams and individuals. Start out by devoting 2 weeks where you incorporate focus blocks throughout the day and see if your productivity improves and your stress decreases. As this week unfolds, I encourage you to consider psychological noise as it may exist within your working environment. Is this something that you experience on a regular basis? And how are you dealing with it? How are you combating psychological noise and its effects? I invite you to take what you've learned in this episode and implement these best practices as a way of reducing psychological noise and its effects. You might be pleasantly surprised how beneficial it can actually be. Something else to consider beyond how psychological noise may affect you, your productivity, and your stress level is also to consider whether or not you may be contributing to psychological noise for those around you, or perhaps contributing to creating the kind of environment that is associated with psychological noise. Knowing what you know from today's episode, if you are contributing to psychological noise, what can you do to improve the situation? For those of you who experience my podcast in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. Once you're there, check out some of the other videos. They focus on stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G is available on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.